So, within different languages and dialects, there's always variation. And so, sociolinguists who study this variation often look at how this variation can be systematic based on different social factors. And basically, you can find systematic variation on any social dimension you can possibly think of. So, age, gender, geography, social class, ethnicity, etc. And so we're going to go through and I'm going to give some examples of specific variation we see along each of these dimensions, just as a concrete example. But before we do, I want to introduce the concept of the sociolinguistic variable. So a variable, just like in math, is a thing that can have multiple values, right? So it's in sociolinguistics, it's going to be the thing that can be pronounced differently. So, for instance, we can take the phonological sociolinguistic variable of the voiced interdental fricative, the. And so that's, again, so we have our slanted brackets here. This is a phoneme, right? This is an abstract category, but this can be pronounced differently. And if we look at we look at some different specific pronunciations we can have here in our square brackets, right? Because they're allophones. We could have someone who says the word brother with a voiced interdental fricative. But you could also hear someone pronouncing it as brudder, or you could hear someone pronouncing it as brother. And actually, both of these pronunciations are pronunciations in different dialects of English. So the question that sociolinguists ask is, how does the pronunciation of a given variable differ based on social factors? Okay, so first social factor, history. Not history, but age, sorry. So older people since the beginning of time have always been saying kids these days are ruining language. And by the way, if you remember back to all those pictures I was showing of this French academy, you might have noticed that every single person in the picture is old. Older people tend to be a little wary of linguistic innovation, even though they were innovators themselves when they were younger. So there's always going to be a lot of age-related variation. We can see this, for instance, just in the change of use of words. So an 80-year-old might say something like splendid, marvelous, or super. A 40-year-old might say awesome or cool when they think something's pretty cool. On this slide, I used to have something that have the 20-year-old thing be what I said, but I am officially old now, so I actually don't know really what 20-year-olds are saying these days. So you guys in the comments should tell me what 20-year-olds these days say for things they like, please, so I can use it next year. All right, so let's look at a phonological variable that varies based on age. And this is actually a study that was done by Jack Chambers. Jack Chambers is a linguistics professor here. He's downtown at St. George, and he's a sociolinguist. And one study he did was he was looking at the variation of there's certain words that can have the palatal glide in them before a high back vowel. So in words like news, some people pronounce it news with the glide, and some people pronounce it news without the glide. So news versus news. And so Jack Chambers did a study where he surveyed people and he asked questions, basically just asking about their own impressions about how they talk. So does news sound like news or news? And people filled out the survey. So try saying these yourself. News, news. Think about which one you say, and also think about whether one or the other sounds more correct. And at least last year when I took a poll on this, it was pretty 50-50, but nobody really cared too much about it. People didn't feel super strongly about it. However, there definitely have been people in the past who have felt super strongly about this. So this is a quote from a newspaper article in 1980. So, can you trust one of our own CBC announcers who says students in opportunity as opposed to students in opportunity? So Certainly not. The minute you hear the mush-mouthed vowel, you picture the beetling forehead, tiny eyes, slack jaw, the flecks of spittle in the corner of the loose mouth. You know that there is a brain here, but wait, sorry. You know that here is a brain, but one evolutionary spin away from the cave. so, so this is pretty intense, right? So based on the fact that this commentator says that people who are pronouncing news this way without the ya are basically cavemen. So that was in 1980. I don't think that there's that many social connotations with this anymore because news has pretty much taken over, actually, and you'll read about this in your book as well. Okay, next example. Social class. Oh, and I guess I want to say before I move on that this is just another example of how arbitrary these things that at one time seem very like people have very strong opinions about. 20 years later, there's no connotations at all. It just these things can change quite rapidly. Okay, example about social class. And here I'm also going to introduce one of a classic sociolinguistic study. It was one of the first and one of the most famous. So we've already talked about rhotic dialects, and so these are, or at least were, and still are, I think, socially stratified in New York City. So higher class speakers are more likely to say car, so have a rhotic pronunciation, and lower class speakers are more likely to drop it and say ka. And so Bill Labov, who was a sociolinguist, very famous one of the first actually, he did interviews with a whole bunch of people from different social classes, and he found that there was a very systematic relationship between people's socioeconomic status and their use of R. And in fact, he made this pretty strong statement that if you rank speakers in terms of socioeconomic class, then they will be ranked in the same order by how much they use R. So he noticed this in interviews, and he decided he was interested in testing this a little bit further. And so what he did was this is called the fourth floor study, because what he did was he went to 3 different department stores in New York. And these 3 different department stores had different sorts of clientele. So there was Saks Fifth Avenue, which had upper class clientele, Macy's, which was sort of in the middle, and then Klein's, which was more working class. Now, note that all of the employees working at these different department stores were of roughly the same socioeconomic class. However, Labov was interested in whether the employees differed in their use of R dropping according to which store they worked at. So what he did, and you're going to see a video of Bill Labov in a little bit, and so you'll know why I'm laughing. He's just super nice old guy. So what he would do is he would go with his notebook into the store. He would find an employee, and then he'd ask them a question to which he knew the answer was going to be 4th floor. So he would go and he would look at the map of the store, and he'd say, oh, he found that women's shoes were on the 4th floor. And so then he'd go up and find an employee and say, hey, so on which floor can I find the women's shoes? And so then the employee would, of course, because they're helpful, they would say the 4th floor. And then he would do something else. He would ask them, oh, I'm sorry, what? He would ask them to say it again. And so then they would repeat it more clearly, 4th floor. Now, as you will note, 4th floor contains 2 coda R's. And so what he did was in his little notebook, he noted how each employee pronounced their post-vocalic R in each of these situations. And what he found was that there was a dramatic difference in the use of the rhotic dialects by employees, and specifically the employees that worked at Saks used the R much more than the employees at Klein's. And also everybody used it more in the second repetition. And why this was important was it shows that it's not just that people vary in how they speak based on their socioeconomic status, but is a demonstration of how people manipulate sociolinguistic variables depending on the situation. And specifically in this case, it seems that the reason that there was variation was because the employees were accommodating to the speech patterns of the customers in the store, right? So the employees were all the same socioeconomic class, but the customers in the store were different, and the speech of the employees was reflecting that.